Yo, what's up guys, it's Talon. So today we're going to be talking about how to navigate different late game scenarios with 4 different examples of a late game. Typically for me, late game is going to mean right around that 3rd dragon mark / second baron, usually 15-ish minutes into the game roughly. And then kind of navigating that part onto the Elder and potentially the last Baron, how to end the game from different points of strength and weaknesses, that type of thing. So if you're interested in these types of videos where I talk over different scenarios rather than full gameplays, let me know and I'll definitely make more of these types of guides in the future. But getting right into it. So the first game we have a Wukong game for where we're ahead. And I'm sure we've had a lot of situations where our teammates kind of throw games when we're ahead and when it's really straightforward. So I'm going to talk about why my team ended up kind of throwing at some points and what to do when your team does throw in those situations. So let's just get into it and kind of talk over the different points that we have in this situation. So obviously here at this point we're quite ahead. We really just want to kind of control whatever objective we can, wait for the enemy to walk into us, just use the fact that we can have control over the lanes and the waves to then easily make the enemy have to respond to waves so that we can get into the bushes really easily. So you can see the first issue here is that nobody on my team is controlling mid-wave, and that includes me. Nobody's controlling mid-wave. And so because of that, the Sett is able to get the mid-wave, which allows him to push it, potentially losing us gold, potentially pressuring mid-turret, and giving him a flank angle into us, which can potentially help him find my carries and just kind of split the fight up. So in the situation where you have a lead, you want to make sure you're controlling mid-wave especially and using mid-wave to rotate into objectives. Whereas what we do here, we go straight in looking for the fight, and you can see I'm kind of trying to get my team to be like, hey, let's look for the Sett, but we're not really doing that, which allows Sett to walk straight in with a flank angle. I'm a Wukong, I can't really do that much against him, and so then at this point you see how the fight kind of breaks out in a pretty negative way. Because we are ahead, it's not like the fight goes too terribly wrong or anything. But it's still this type of scenario that we'll often see where people don't know how to navigate these types of situations, and then they end up throwing the game. So in this situation, again, it worked out fine. We're skipping through, you know, we ended up still winning the fight, getting the dragon. But if we'd set up more properly, we would have been in a better scenario. But we do use this to get Baron, so we actually don't get dragon, we get Baron from this. And we use the fact that we got Baron to then go, I believe, and then get dragon afterwards. Dragon doesn't really matter because each team has a dragon. So that's one thing to mention as well in late games. If each team has a dragon, the 3rd dragon doesn't matter because nobody can get soul, so you don't have to prioritize it very heavily. If you win a fight in the later parts of the game, usually you want to prioritize going for the Baron if the Elder Dragon hasn't yet spawned, which is why right after we won that fight, we go for the Baron, and we use the Baron to push out the lane and then start pressuring the enemy. So usually, once you get a Baron or something like that in the late game, you want to use it one of 2 ways. You want to use it either pushing 2 lanes out, where you have a lot of people in mid and then 1 or 2 people on the side lane, pushing out either one or both of the side lanes so that the waves will sync up together and hit the turrets at the same time. That's what you ideally want. Or you can use the Baron as a pressure point to go into the Elder Dragon. So that's kind of what we're doing here. Since we have Baron and Elder Dragon is spawning, and if you look in the top right here, you can see it says 43 seconds left on our Baron, and there's only 15 seconds left until Elder Dragon spawns. When you're in a situation like this, you want to use the fact that the Baron's going to give you pressure to easily zone people and get the Barons, or get the Elder rather. So what we should have done is gone further into the Elder Dragon here and just started hitting it, but not fully killing it, and then waiting for the enemy to kind of walk up and then pressuring them whenever they walk up so we can get an easy fight. But what we do is we fight them at their turret, which leads to a really easy opportunity for the enemy to pick us, which is exactly what they do. They shut down my fed Swain, and then my teammates completely throw. They end up getting caught because, again, we weren't controlling the objective. We weren't using the waves to pressure the enemy and then kind of, you know, poke them when they come in, try to come into the Elder Dragon, because of course they're going to try to contest it, and then we'd be able to zone them and find free picks. So that's sort of what you want to do when you're ahead and when you're in a really good situation. Push out the waves and then use the waves as a way to make the enemy have to kind of clear the waves and show themselves on vision while you can get into the objective. And then when you're on the objective, you use that you know, vision that you have set up and everything, and the fact that you've pushed in the waves to zone the enemy off or to catch them by surprise in a bush or something like that. That's going to be the ideal way to approach these late game scenarios, rather than kind of, you know, going under their turret trying to fight them right when there's like an Elder Dragon or something like that. So now in this situation, I'm sure you guys have all been in it. You're winning a game, your teammates randomly throw, and now the Elder Dragon is potentially going to be taken by the enemy, but you're a pretty fed jungler or mid or someone. So what I need to do in this situation is look for a pick. Right now, we need to try to find a way to catch out one of the enemies as they overextend. And a lot of times, a lot of assassins like Wukong, Zed, whatever, can do that. And so I'm really just trying to use my vision to see if I can catch out the enemy. So I'm trying to go around the wall, trying to see if I can use my invisibility, and that's exactly what we do. And so this one pick allows us to have some amount of pressure where now we're not as worried. However, we're still in a situation where we know we're going to lose the fight. My Fed Swain is dead. He was by far the most fed member of my team alongside myself. And my teammates are not in a good spot. I have TP, which means I don't have a summoner spell, or I don't have a, combat like Gargoyle or something. I don't have anything like that. And so at this point, you have to realize, what is the actual way that we lose this game? The way that we lose this game, and the way that you're going to lose most games that you're throwing like this, is when the enemy get that really important objective. And so because of that, I realized that all that matters is this Elder Dragon. And so I'm sitting in this bush waiting for the enemy to start Elder Dragon with this vision thing. And they're probably not going to expect a Wukong to just sit here the whole time instead of fighting them. A lot of people would have gone on this fight, died because 2 of my teammates are dead, and I'm just going to, easily get cleaned up and die. And they would have lost the game instantly. But instead, I realized that the objective is really what matters. And so I need to prioritize potentially stealing that. Which kind of brings me to another point. When you're ahead in a game, you typically don't want to flip objectives, and flipping objectives means taking a 50-50 smite, trying to win the smite even when the enemy jungle's alive and the enemy team is alive. When you're ahead, you want to prioritize the fight, kill the enemy, and then get the objective after. But when you're behind, and in this game we're functionally behind because I have 2 dead teammates and they only have 1. When you're behind, you want to make sure that you can flip objectives. Like, you're perfectly fine with flipping objectives, because if you win the smite, you will probably just win the game. And if you lose the smite, you were going to lose the game anyway because you were already at a disadvantage. So that's why here, I know that at this point, prioritizing the flip is really what makes sense to me. And so I'm waiting for the enemy to go on it. You see, I'm kind of waiting for them to get it pretty low, and then I'm going to use the vision thing. I'm going to use my invisibility to sneak on them, and then we end up luckily hitting the smite, which pretty much leads to the game being won when it otherwise would have been lost in this scenario. And I also make sure that I'm not taking too many dumb risks. I don't go forward. We have the Elder Dragon now. And now what you want to do with Elder Dragon is use Elder to get Baron. So Baron spawns in a minute. That's typically the sequence you're going to follow when you have Elder. You get Elder, you use Elder to get Baron, and you use Baron to end the game. And so that's exactly what we're going to do here. Very straightforward. Where again, notice how this time we controlled the mid wave. Our teammates controlled the mid wave, and we use that to then zone the enemy off and to poke them and get the initial fight on them. So you can see the difference here in this fight is that we're able to fight a lot more freely because we have the objective, or we have the mid lane controlled. And because of that, we end up kind of just going in for the fight, using our Elder Dragon to win the fight. But the fight still doesn't go as well as we would want, right? Because our teammates still do die. And we still have a lot more that we have to do to win this game because the fight's pretty close. At this point, again, a lot of patience and looking for just an assassination on some type of squishy champion is how we're probably going to win the game, and then using that to get Baron. But again, here, it's a lot more complicated because of the fact that our teammates once again kind of got caught for no reason. So at that point, we're just resetting. We're trying to make sure that we're strong enough for the fight. We realize once again the game revolves around Baron. We need to control the waves, and then we need to look for some type of pick around someone. Because now that we don't have Elder, we're in a lot more of an even spot. And then this comes to, again, late game fights around key objectives like Baron. So in this situation, my teammate is kind of getting caught, and I know 2 of my teammates are not yet alive. So my goal in this fight is not kill the enemy, win this fight, because I'm not going to win this fight with just me, Lulu, and Poppy against 4 of the enemy. But how I am going to win the fight is by stalling the game out long enough for my Swain and my Jhin to respawn. And so that's another thing you often have to understand. Maybe you're strong, again, like in this game, we're pretty strong as a team, but momentarily we're weak because 2 of my teammates got caught because they're silly geese. And when we're waiting for that type of situation, we just have to stall. And so when my Poppy gets caught here, I'm going in with the intention of just peeling, basically. Like, obviously, I'm looking to see if I can pressure the enemy off. If I can get a pick on them, great. But I'm mostly just here, just using my ult and using my tankiness to peel for my teammate. And that allows him to survive when he otherwise would have 100% died if they didn't focus me. And this leads to enough time for my Swain to respawn, who again is really fed this game, because this is a game where we kind of threw, but we were really, really ahead. 6k gold ahead at that time, which leads to us getting complete control over this objective. Jhin ends up getting the snipe onto the Viego, and we win the fight. So again, to reiterate the main points of playing when you're ahead and then your teammates kind of throw, you want to make sure you're controlling mid wave and then going into the objective, unlike what my team did. And then if you do realize that some of your teammates have died and got caught, don't overforce the fight when it's already lost. Instead, understand what's important, which is the objective, and try your best to stall for your teammates to respawn if that is a possibility. So that's the first scenario. Now let's go into the second scenario. Okay, scenario number 2 is how to play from behind. So in this game, I'm Echo, we're down 6k gold, I just died, each team has 1 dragon, and the third dragon is about to spawn. So one really important thing to understand when you're playing a late game from behind is you can play more to pressure the Baron. The dragon isn't what's going to win you the game, because dragon, even if you're giving the enemy dragon soul, it does not give enough stats to really just come back just from getting that 1 dragon. But the way you can come back is sneaking a Baron when the enemy are distracted by Baron, or the enemy start Baron and they throw around Baron, and then you pressure that, you get the Baron, and you use that to get some turrets and come back in the game. So in this situation, we're just pressuring around the Baron, because if the enemy go dragon, which a lot of low elo teammates or opponents do, in this case we're against 3 sovereigns, so they're smart enough to not do that, but in a lot of games the enemy will just go dragon and you can sneak a Baron. But in this type of situation, the enemy can't actually do Baron. You can see they're trying to do it, but they can't do it because Baron lowers resistances and makes them weaker overall. And so when they try zoning and kind of fighting around this Baron, it leads to a very volatile fight, which leads to potentially an outplay like this where Zed gets caught and then the enemy start to throw. So it's very common that the enemy, when they're ahead, will try to overforce Baron, as you saw there, and it leads to these random fights and then, a couple silly mistakes from 1 or 2 players, and all of a sudden the enemy are kind of going to throw a game. So really what's important to note, late game when you're behind, you can take a lot more risks. You can flip objectives. As I was saying before, don't flip objectives when you're ahead, but when you're behind, flipping objectives is a very good way to possibly come back, because you don't really have anything to lose. And then again, taking those fights around those key objectives and using potentially a random third dragon as a distraction to sneak Baron or something like that can lead to some type of situation like this. And then when it comes to playing the fights, because we're still behind even after this, you're going to see we use the Baron to kind of, stymie their push a bit, get some pressure, but we're still not in a great spot. The enemy are still pretty strong. So when you're in this type of situation, you have to play fights to really target the enemy carry or whoever's strong, or to get a really good wombo combo. Like, you have to play around getting kind of a perfect storm of things. And the way you're often going to do this is understanding how you need to approach a fight. So if you're an ADC or a carry, you need to position within, your supports. You need to play front to back, pretty straightforward. If you're an assassin, you need to find those creative flank angles to try to pressure the enemy and kind of zone them into the enemy or into your team. So kind of how Set did in that earlier game. You can see how I'm taking control of the mid wave here, and then I'm looking for a flank angle to kind of push the enemy into my team potentially, and find some type of angle like that. And so you can kind of see these different scenarios where, again, you have to understand you're looking for that outplay where you get a 1v9 play where you get some crazy Echo ult, or you get, a perfect setup, or you get a perfect Wukong ult or something like that. You're looking for a lot more like perfect scenarios, which means you look for flank angles, you try to be more creative, you take more risks, stuff like that. And so you can see I'm pushing the enemy into my teammate here, which means that they immediately have to go in, which then allows me to find a nice angle to get in for the stun, and I barely end up surviving. Again, you see with the risky play, I get a huge ultimate off, which cleans them up really well, and then Zeri does an amazing job of cleaning up the rest of the enemy, playing this fight really well. And so again, you can see the kind of main things to do when you're behind: pressure those key objectives. Even if you're using a dragon or something as a distraction, just make sure you're kind of spending a lot of time around that Baron or something, because the enemy will often throw. Again, 3 sovereigns on enemy team, and they threw around the Baron. And then also, again, just playing around those, bigger fight angles where you're taking more risks, you're looking for the flips, you're kind of okay with those 50-50 plays, because it's usually not going to work out because you're already behind. So you have nothing to lose. You might as well take the risk. You might as well look for that random flank. And then again, controlling that mid wave like I did always is really valuable in the late game. Anytime you've controlled the mid wave, it means that you get first move into wherever you want. Again, you saw because I had control of the mid wave, I was able to pressure the enemy into that dragon pit earlier than they wanted, which leads to, again, another nice comeback angle here. Okay, and then the third scenario is going to be how to play in a close game. So in this situation, we're down 2 dragons. The enemy are up or are down 1,000 gold. Overall, you know, we have some strong members. I'm really strong. My Wukong's quite strong. Vayne's decently strong. They have a super fed Zed. We have a feeding Sona. They have, you know, not a very good ADC. So it's kind of like all over the place. You know, this is how a lot of ranked games are. There's some really good players on each team. There's some really bad players. There's kind of a lot going on. And so we're going to start talking about how to play this scenario. So the first thing to note is I'd ended up dying a second ago for the inhib to just get the inhib to get that pressure, to kind of have that constant pressure. And because I'm dead in a late game scenario, I end up buying TP to join the fight. And so you're going to see a lot of times you can buy TP to kind of come back to a fight when you're already dead or something like that. And that's going to be really important on these really important fights, like this is around the soul. If the enemy get this, they get soul. So anytime there's like a soul, there's an elder, there's a baron, buying that TP to potentially come to the fight is very valuable. And if you want to know how buying TP works, if you already have an enchant, you can just go and buy it as you see here for 660. It will have 0 cooldown if your current enchant's on 0 cooldown, and if your current enchant is higher, then it'll take that cooldown, but only to 20 seconds. So if it will only go to a 20-second cooldown if you buy it, it will never go higher than 20 seconds. So if you buy it within 20 seconds, even if your enchant's on cooldown, you can end up getting value from it. And then you saw we use that again in this kind of messy game where we have the sides pushed, but we kind of are still, you know, in a very messy spot. We use that TP to get control, to get a kill, and then let our team get the objective. So that's kind of an important, you know, first thing to note. And then more generally, playing from a close game, what you really need to do is control that mid wave again, which you can see I constantly talk about mid wave. Side waves are important too, and you can see because we have the inhibs, we kind of have that natural side lane pressure. But if you're a split pushing Baron laner or something like that, side lane pressure is very important as well, and you can provide that, you know, as a Jax, as a Fiora, whatever. But here we really have that side lane pressure naturally, and then we're just controlling the mid wave so that we can go into the objective first. So again, constant control over the mid wave leads to us finding potential picks, like on this Xayah here, where we force out her ult and her flash. And then it also leads to us having control, so that if the enemy walk into us, you know, it's very easy to kind of catch them out. Like Zed can't really pick us when we have, you know, 4 people all kind of grouped around the objective, using that mid wave where the enemy are a lot more pressured back, so it's a lot harder for them to do much. In these types of scenarios, you want to try your best to ward over the walls if you can, so you can see the enemy, like where the pike is, for example. And sometimes, you know, your teammates are going to get picked in these scenarios too, because it's a closer game. You know, again, sometimes you're going to have some good teammates, some bad teammates. And so in this situation, the Ezreal got picked. So what do we need to do? Obviously here I have my item, I'm going to recall for it. But we need to, again, control that mid wave and then go into the Elder Dragon, use the fact that we can hopefully get Elder to then get Baron. But because Ezreal's currently dead, we want to try to zone, or we want to stall rather. So we're trying our best to stall. Typically that's what you want to do if your teammate's dead. Our teammates get a quick pick on the side lane, which again is kind of the big mistake of the Xayah, is that she was on the wrong side of the map as the Elder was spawning. If she was controlling mid wave with her team, she never gets picked there. But instead she gets picked, as you saw, because of the fact that she's kind of stupidly on the side lane as an AD carry late in the game, when the objective's spawning. And so then we use that fact that we got that pick, that we had control of the mid wave, to kind of, you know, get access into the enemy, to then have a decent position for this fight. And then we just play the fight out, you know, in a pretty straightforward manner, just kind of front to back with our team, playing around our stun, and just doing basically as much as we can in the fight, making sure we don't get ulted by the Zed, and then we win the fight. So again, the main things to kind of keep in mind in these closer games is mid-wave control is most important. Side lane control is definitely pretty important as well, and then using that mid or side lane control to be on the objective first, to ward over the walls, to get potential picks and stuff like that right before the objectives. Those types of things are really important, and then use the fact that you can get the Elder if you do win that fight by doing those things that we said to set up, to then go to the Baron after. So we use the fact that we have the Elder to get the Baron, our team gets the Baron, and then the final nail in the coffin is properly utilizing Baron. So when you have Baron and Elder, you want to make sure that you're pushing multiple lanes. So you have some people in mid lane, make sure you have someone on at least one side lane, maybe even 2. It could be one side lane or 2, but you need to be pushing 2 or 3 lanes total. And then you want to try to sync up your waves. So again, I want my top lane wave to be hitting their turret / nexus at the same time that their you know, that my mid wave is hitting. And so in this case, we're making sure that we get this top lane wave in right away. We're then pressuring mid lane now that the top lane wave is there, because I know I can't actually like fully end, you know, with that top wave yet. We use it to get a pick on the enemy, and then we finally end the game. So that's kind of, again, the straightforward way to sort of end the game from a closer game. You can see in all these games, mid-wave control is absolutely the most important thing. But now let's get into the final scenario. All right, so in this final scenario, I have Soul. I am over 5,000 gold ahead of the Ahri. I'm extremely fed, and we're pretty much just trying to close this game out in a clean manner. You're going to see it doesn't end up quite being so clean, but I want to talk about navigating the game as a really fed carry, how to kind of play these late games in these types of scenarios, and then what to do typically when you are more ahead. So when we are more ahead, the first thing we don't want is a side laner randomly dying on a side lane. So if you're the Baron laner and your team's ahead, instead of doing what the Aatrox did, which again, we'll just kind of go back, he ended up taking an over-aggressive fight right before the objective. So a couple important things to note. Death timers are typically around 45 seconds in the late game. So if you know that Baron or Elder is spawning within 45 seconds, you have to be really careful not to die, because if you die and then, you know, you're dead while the Elder or Dragon is, or Baron is spawning or whatever, your team might lose that, the enemy might get it. So very risky of Aatrox. Typically, you don't want to take those risks on side lane when your team is quite ahead. Instead, what you want to do, you want to push out the side lane so you have control over it, and then rotate towards your team. So after Aatrox pushed bottom lane here, like he has already, he could either recall and then go with his team, or he could just go straight towards mid with his team. So that's the first thing to understand, how to play it as a side laner. But despite that, we're still in a fine spot. Because of the fact that we're so fed. And so what we're going to end up doing here is really just, again, controlling this mid wave, as you see us kind of doing every time, and then getting vision pretty deep into the enemy jungle. So that's what you really want to do when you're ahead quite a bit, because again, we're ahead over 4K and we have Soul. We want to use the fact that we have control to push the mid wave out and then get complete control. You can see how we're like warding, we're using the vision thing, and then I'm going back to control this mid wave again to make sure we have control over it. And it's really hard for the enemy to walk up. If they walk up, they get Orianna balled to the face. Nobody really wants my balls in their face. You know, it's not really something many people want, believe it or not. And so we're using the fact that we have complete control to just zone the enemy off to get a bunch of poke onto them, as you can see there, just completely poking out the Melio. Now in this scenario, you know, it gets a bit messy because of the fact that our Aatrox was dead. I could have waited for Aatrox to respawn, ended up kind of getting picked a little bit, but it's still not the end of the world because I had my flash, I had cleanse, I had QSS, and so I could be a little more aggressive. But now because I only have QSS left, I need to be a bit more relaxed, which is why I end up going and getting the heal, making sure I'm in a position to set up. And then again, at this point in the game, I don't want to flip this. I don't like my team. You can see I'm pinging retreat, retreat, stop this. I don't want them doing this at all. And so what I'm doing is I'm just going and zoning. So when your team ends up doing some, and Fiora is the jungler in this game, if you don't know, by the way. When you're in this scenario where your team's kind of flipping for no reason as the carry, just try to zone and use your damage that you have to get the objective, or to zone the enemy from getting the objective. Don't just flip the objective for no reason. And then here, because I know my team's flipping it, I'm like, okay, let me just be the jungler. I'll smite it. Because usually when you're a fed carry, especially if you're like a mage, you have really good burst damage to smite. If you're a fed Varus, those types of things too. And so I use that to at least secure it because I knew my team was going to flip it anyways. And so basically the general point that you can kind of see from this is don't take those unnecessary risks on side lane when you're ahead, because that's going to lead to you know, potentially getting caught right before an objective, which leads to your team potentially losing it, which was what kind of made this whole thing more risky for us. As the carry, you can position a little more aggressive if you have stasis, flash, cleanse, etc. But once those things are down, you got to be a bit more patient. Don't flip those objectives from ahead. Instead, when you're ahead, just zone the enemy, get control of the mid wave, get vision over the walls, use that kind of constant pressure you have to just zone the enemy, poke them out, and then eventually, you know, all in them when they're low enough, rather than taking those unnecessary risks by flipping the objective. And then if your team does flip the objective because they're silly little geese, as I said before, just make sure you're zoning the enemy first, rather than flipping it. And then if your team just gets it really low, you know, it's 2,000, whatever, then you can commit to the flip, because at that point you just need to help your team damage it because they're being idiots. So that's about what you need to understand for that so far. And then at this point, now that, again, I'm really fed as a carry, even though my teammates are, 2 of them are dead, I know I can still zone the enemy off, and so really what I'm doing here is just looking for as much poke as possible to pressure them off. I'm positioning quite safe because I know, like, again, I really am the person that matters above everyone else, so I'm just using my champion strength because I'm so fed to just poke the enemy off, to kind of zone them, to get that double kill, go on the Melio, get the triple kill, and then carry the fight, as you saw here. Sadly, my quadra kill got stolen by Jhin. I would think that Jhin would like quadra kills, and he would want me to get one because, you know, he likes counting to number 4, but whatever. He hates me. It's fine. We end the game and we win. So that's really it for my full guide to the late game, playing from ahead, playing from behind, playing closer games, playing as a carry, all those different types of things. He even talked about playing as like a side laner, you know, different types of things, understanding your role, understanding the win conditions, all those types of things, you know, understanding, okay, is the objective what's important? Is my team what's important? Do I need to just play to protect my carry? Do I need to play to, you know, protect myself? Understanding those different types of things depending on the game is all important. And again, just remember, above all else, control that mid wave. Ideally the side waves as well, but really that mid wave is what's most important, and using the mid wave pressure to go into the side lane. So that's it for my late game guide. If you guys like these types of videos, you want different guides on different parts of the game or different aspects of the game, anything like that, let me know. Anything like that. I also do coaching for $25 an hour as a 5-time sovereign, 4-time top 10 on the server, 3 times being top 10 on the server playing autofill. I think I can provide you guys with some value. So I'll see you guys later.